Marie Harf is Exhibit A for the comprehensive failure of the U.S. educational system. That woman has a master's degree in international relations from the University of Virginia. Moms and dads, save your money. Now, what she was saying today about jobs, terrorists just need jobs. Then we give them union cards and a path to citizenship. When he pulled the trigger, trying to kill a cartoonist and as many other Danes as he could, was he screaming jobs, jobs, jobs? No, he was screaming Allahu Akbar.
Retired Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Peters responding to State Department spokesman Marie Harf's claim that terrorism is an economic problem in the Mideast fueled by lack of jobs. Later, Marie Harf doubled down on those claims, saying her argument may be too nuanced for some.
Colonel Peters also pointed out that Osama bin Laden was wealthy and that the Fort Hood shooter had a job. He was a major in the U.S. Army.
Moreover, he wasn't just a major, he was a psychiatric physician. Right. At any rate, alongside Miranda Khan, let's welcome in via Skype our friend Ryan Mauro, national security analyst, to go in depth on this story. Hey, Ryan, are the spokespeople for this administration sounding more like college co-eds at some group discussion following class than people who are supposed to represent the policy formulators of the free world?
Yes, I mean, there's so many different ways that we can discuss this. I have an article out right now at clarionproject.org that goes through the different analysis of why this is important, because I think a lot of the coverage is basically saying, oh, look at what stupid thing this State Department spokesperson said, and it's actually much bigger and more dangerous than that. Look at her bio. She was a Middle East analyst for the CIA, and she believes this. She was an advisor to Chuck Hagel when he was Secretary of Defense. John Kerry has said this exact same thing. So did George W. Bush. So what you have is a fact-free theory about what drives terrorism that's been long discredited. Study after study has found no connection between unemployment or lack of education or poverty and terrorism, yet the highest elites of the national security apparatus just accept it as if it's just fact. Thankfully, the American people and even the news media understand this now to the point where when she says this, you have Chris Matthews and Wolf Blitzer basically restraining themselves to not call her an idiot.
So let me ask you, Ryan, so was this like a calculated move, or is she clueless, so to speak? I mean, do you think that she was purposely trying to shift the focus away from religious extremism being the reason that's fueling these terrorist acts instead of economic hardship? I mean, was it a calculated move?
I think she genuinely believes it, but it was a calculated move to say. I think it seemed desperate to me that they're just grasping at straws to find just anything to attribute this problem to other than saying Islamic extremism, the Islamist ideology, whatever you want to call it. And so for them, blaming it on poverty and taking this kind of Marxist theory that says that this is just a product of class warfare and societal injustice, for them is more suitable than saying what everyone understands the problem is, which is radical Islam, because it's not normal for someone who's unemployed to go and then join ISIS. If that was true, I said yesterday, then Russell Brand should be put on a terror watch list. You know, then how many people are out of work and don't join ISIS?
Well, there is one grisly economic component to the atrocities that we've seen from ISIS, especially the beheadings of those Christians. There are reports that ISIS could be harvesting organs, human organs, to finance its operations. We're still checking on that report, but if that is true, in the minute that remains in this segment, Ryan, to whom would they be selling those harvested human organs?
I don't know, and without getting specific details, I wouldn't want to substantiate that report, because that's one of the very common myths that goes out in the Middle East, where whoever you don't like, what do you say about them? That they're trafficking in organs. You'll see it about the Israelis, about the Iranians, you'll hear it about everybody. So I'm skeptical of that.
Well, again, for the record, we should point out that that report is cited on our parent website, Newsmax.com, but we will be mindful of the admonitions Ryan Mauro brings to the table. Ryan, we're going to ask you to stay with us, and wherever you're watching, whatever you're doing, we ask you to stay with us as well. Ryan Mauro will be back to talk more about ISIS, the implications of its continued assault and its continuing atrocities in the Middle East. That, as America's Forum continues here on Newsmax TV, right after these messages.
We spend more time talking about what do you call it, as opposed to what do you do about it, you know? I mean, really, if Fox didn't talk about this, they'd have nothing else to talk about. Radical Islam, Islamic extremism, I'm not sure an awful lot is gained by saying that.
Attorney General Eric Holder yesterday essentially saying words don't matter, at least not when it comes to how we label Islamic extremism. Let's continue our conversation now with national security analyst Ryan Mauro. And Ryan, though the administration is loath to use the terms Islamic terror and Islamic extremism, there was a recent piece in The Atlantic from Graham Wood entitled What ISIS Really Wants. And that article by Graham Wood reads in part, quote, "The reality is that the Islamic State is Islamic, very Islamic. Yes, it has attracted psychopaths and adventure seekers drawn largely from the disaffected populations of the Middle East and Europe, but the religion preached by its most ardent followers derives from coherent and even learned interpretations of Islam." Ryan, when will the Obama administration recognize what I'm assuming, since it's in The Atlantic, probably someone who leans to the left, everybody outside of the administration can say it. Why can't the president and those who work for him say Islamic terror?
Well, first, you're right about everyone using this terminology right now. The only groups that don't want us to are groups that are themselves linked to Islamists and the Muslim Brotherhood. But if you look at the Muslim world, everyone's using this terminology now. So that idea that saying radical Islam results in a backlash, that's disproven now. But again, this goes back to our earlier point that we have these preconceived notions about how terrorism and radicalism operates that we just can't seem to shake, no matter how fact-free they are. I was very disappointed by what Eric Holder said, because what that tells me is that they're not listening to the rationale behind the criticism, because it's not about just saying we're at war with radical Islam. It's not about semantics. It's about creating a framework for a strategy to combat the problem that currently does not exist. And Eric Holder is not acknowledging that that's what we're talking about. It's not about words. As an example of this, the same State Department spokeswoman, she earlier made a fool of herself on the Kelly file because President Obama was citing this terrorism-supporting cleric at the UN. And the State Department sends this woman to go appear on the Kelly file to discuss it. And it was a very awkward interview. But if the framework had been that we were fighting radical Islam, that wouldn't have gotten through, that would have been blocked by the filter. President Obama wouldn't have gotten from the UN and said, I have a great moderate here for you to follow. And then he turns out to say American soldiers should be killed by jihadists. So there's very real implications behind how you frame this in calling it radical Islam.
I've got a few more thoughts on Marie Harf about an hour from now in my commentary, but let's end with the minute remains with a question. It is given in terms of public policy discussion and debating matters of great import that the definition of terms, the accurate definition of terms, is essential. From that rationale, the longer the White House stays away from defining this as Islamic terror, what do you believe the implications are?
Virtually every mistake that we've been making goes back to this point. And it's about the framework, and you have to describe the framework, which is a fight against radical Islam. It's not about the terminology of countering violent extremism versus radical Islam. It's about what you do with that. And so as an example, how we've been treating the Egyptian president, who's saying that we need to fight the Islamists, separate mosque and state, saying all of these things that analysts like myself have been waiting and begging to hear. He says it, and then the Obama administration ignores it and earlier bashes him. Our mistakes in relation to the Muslim Brotherhood. Why are they happening? Because we're not defining the enemy as radical Islam. If you did, you would have to combat the Muslim Brotherhood. Instead, we treat them as moderates. Everything goes back to this point.
Ryan Mauro, you have our thanks. We continue to monitor your work for ClarionProject.org. When we come back, Dan Gaynor will be here to talk about Brian Williams and the mainstream coverage of climate change.